Welcome. It's literally as Feck time again. I'm Clive Lewis. He is
Nick,
and he's tired. Hence the
delay. Yes, yeah. There'll be a. It's not just that I'm on the other side of the world from where Clive is, but there is a significant brainular decay happening today. But
is brain a proper word?
Oh, I'm fairly certain it is. Yes.
Right. Okay. Okay, I've learned write that one down. So we're taking to the skies today. We're off.
Yes. Huzzah!
This book, Richard Holmes's "Falling Upwards: How We Took to the Air." There we go. And I've noticed you've got some.
Oh yes. I wanted to be sure I had things at hand.
I have, and then I transferred them all to notes.
Oh,
so, yeah.
Okay.
To get through here. So so let's crack on. So this is basically a book about ballooning, the history of ballooning, specifically Victorian era Victorian Edwardian era ballooning.
Yeah,
takes up the majority of it, right?
They touch a little bit on the dirigible and the Zeppelin as the next stage in it, but really most of the book is your standard roundy hot air balloon with a little basket underneath. I have to say, before we go any further, Clive,
yes,
this book is proof of concept for me of why I'm doing the show with you.
Okay,
because there isn't any way in a million years I ever would have walked through my local Chapters or Indigo or bookshop and been like, oh yeah, that's what I want to read. A lengthy history of ballooning.
Really?
Yeah, no, it would never. I would have died. Gone to my unearthly paradise without ever having read this book, and I would have been much poorer for it. So
I'm glad to hear it. Although I'm slightly so when I initially said let's do this, I mean, were you not immediately excited by it? Were you like
No, I think I was excited because I thought to myself exactly what I just said. I thought, I would never have thought to read this.
Okay.
And then when it came in the mail and I read the back, I mean, I would have read a little bit online just to see what's this all about. But when I read the back of it, and I was in love almost from page one, and I was like, this is fantastic. So anyway, I guess spoiler alert, I really like this book. We don't have to.
I enjoyed it as well. So until next time on,
yes. So Richard Holmes seems to have written a couple of other he seems to be a historicist of some kind, right? He's
I haven't read any of his other things, but on the strength of this, I think I might give some of his. Actually, I should have looked this up. I meant to do this before we came on, so I'll just do it quickly now, because he's done similar books about different. Richard Holmes, Connecticut settler. No, that's not the one I'm looking for. Wikipedia. I'm assuming this man has a Wikipedia. Richard Holmes biographer. Yeah, and some of his other ones are, let's see. Shelley. Ridge. I suppose this is the other one that immediately jumps out is The Age of Wonder, which is actually from the author.
Yes.
Of Wonder.
Yes.
How the Romantic Generation discovered the beauty and terror of science.
Yeah, that does sound good.
Yes. So that might be next on my Richard Holmes list.
Okay.
But he does, if this is anything to go by, he does write very readable and easy to grasp kind of population, but not too
stupid.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not, it's not. I mean, I shouldn't put down poor old Colin Wilson, but every now and again, his things felt a bit cobbled together. Some of those longer works of murder stuff that he would do, whereas this does feel very well researched, very well it's very well sourced, lots of footnotes.
I mean, it's a slightly strange analogy. I don't know if it's. I mean, because the thing with Colin Wilson is, I think more than anything else was Colin Wilson was a chronicler of bullshit often. As
Yeah, that is true.
So,
that is true.
It's slightly, yeah. I don't know if it's research
right,
or if it was just his subjects were.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
Colin Wilson fascinates me because I've read some other Colin, non-that stuff Colin Wilson, and I've seen him in interviews and things on YouTube, and he seems like such a smart, sharp dude. But the fact that he wrote about a load of crap as well,
yeah,
like
yes, yeah.
Kind of, I find those two things difficult to.
But that's very 70s to me. That's a very 1970s of people, Eric von Daniken and that whole, people who just got interested in stuff that was just obviously malarkey.
Yeah, but I think Colin Wilson was a different breed to Eric von Daniken, right? I don't know much about Eric von Daniken, but either Eric von Daniken was extremely gullible or mercenary. Yeah,
a mercenary charlatan. Yeah. But anyway, but this, I mean, as I said, I think what you said is right. This is popular history, kind of at its best. Right.
I think so. Yeah.
And like you said, it's well written.
It's a book about a subject you might not necessarily like. If you picked up like a big hardback and the title wasn't falling upwards, it was something like, the history of the balloon and the dirigible from and very specific dates. You'd be like, "Ooh, that's a bit too in the weeds." For me.
Yes, yeah.
But this is a good what's the phrase? Gateway drug, I guess.
Yes. I do. My wife has long wanted me to go on a balloon ride, and I've always been like, yeah. And actually, I have to say, after reading this, I'm still like, yeah. Because I guess we'll get into that. It's still to this day not a safe way to travel, or not even a way to travel, to be honest, other than directly up and down when you're tethered. Because
I wouldn't say it comes top of the list if you want to be somewhere on time, right? Like
no.
So you've not been in a balloon?
No, I have not. But you said to me that you thought you had.
Well, excuse me. I definitely know I have been in a tethered balloon because me and my wife went in one when we were in Cambodia.
Okay.
So we've definitely been in a tethered balloon.
That's a great place to take a balloon ride.
I don't know why there was a balloon ride nearby Phnom Penh. Something we did.
Well, I mean, I guess you can avoid all of the leftover landmines that the US strew all over. Yeah, you just balloon over those countries. Okay. Yeah. But then you also said that was there a balloon race somewhere in Wales when you were?
Yes, the nearby village was the takeoff site for a fairly regular balloon race when I was a kid, and I remember I can't remember what time of year it was, but they had it every year for a while. I don't know if they still do it. I think they might do it intermittently. There's another big balloon race in Bristol, I think would be the nearest place other than, but yeah, they took off from the village of Llandovery, and you would see in my village 6 miles away, depending on which way they blow, occasionally you would see balloons going overhead. But if you went up to the takeoff point was around the back of this old castle. There's like a field, and that's where and if you went up there early enough in the morning, when they were kind of testing the balloons, sometimes kids would be allowed to get in the basket and quick up and down. And it's one of those things. I don't know if I actually remember going up in a balloon when I was a child, or if I've just made that up. I still don't know. So, but even then, it would have been up and down, so it might have been tethered at that point. But no, I certainly haven't swept across the landscape.
Right. You didn't do any transatlantic or trans-Pacific flights.
No, with Eddie Redmayne.
No.
Right. So something before we get into kind of the meat of it, something that this book did make me think a little bit about after I'd finished it, and I went back and looked to see if it had anything in its early pages, and that is like when would the first use of a balloon have been, right? Because the thing I was thinking about after reading the book, I put it down, thinking, like even without knowing the science behind it, people would have noticed things like, oh, smoke seems to make that thing rise, or
yeah.
so there are a few mentions in the, and I tried chasing these up, just very briefly running some Google searches, but I couldn't really find much, so I'm not quite sure what Richard Holmes's sources might be. But for instance, not human flight, but he talks about like in Romance of the Three Kingdoms period, there's use of like oil lamps inside paper bags in battles,
right?
Throw enemies off the scent, which is something I don't actually remember reading, but apparently,
right. But there is a much longer, like the original text is.
There's a lot to remember.
Yeah.
And then another one he mentions in 13th century kind of Mongol ruled China, they would have had paper balloons like in festivals and things like that.
Yes.
More interestingly, he mentions, and again, just there's no detail, pre-Inca, and I had to look this up, but Inca 1438 onwards, but pre-Inca shamanic balloon flights. I have no idea what that means, but and then even more interestingly, again in Peru, out of Peru, funeral balloons over the Pacific.
Oh, okay.
Kind of like, Vikings and burning boats, right? But they would have put a corpse in a balloon and send it out over the sea. So that fascinates me. Like,
yeah.
Strikes me as, I know a manned flight, if the man is dead, might not count, but that strikes me as, that's pretty impressive.
But the fact that it could lift something as heavy, I mean, like, because the whole idea of it being able to lift things that are heavier than air into the air. Yeah, it's a.
And you mentioned Eric von Daniken. He mentions the Nazca designs as well, whereas Eric von Daniken went immediately to, it must be aliens.
Yep, aliens.
Richard Holmes kind of points out that, well, probably slightly more likely that someone worked out how to fly a balloon or something like that. So they were able to actually see what they were doing, or confirm it was there.
And there are those huge ones in. Is it in Wales or is it in England or is it Cornwall? Cornwall, right? That's got those massive figures that are on the sides of hills.
Yeah, that's definitely aliens. It's definitely aliens.
Oh, okay, that is aliens. Okay, I thought it was Celts, but yeah, Celtic balloonists. But I mean, obviously, the majority of this book is focused on that kind of classical.
Yes, but it just made me think of, I suppose you'd call it the prehistory of the balloon, right? But no, we jump in, I suppose, end of 18th century, specifically 1783 in France, and there's a lot of French stuff. Right?
Yes, the French seem to be really into their balloons. This is something that was new to me. It's funny, he does touch a little bit on mythology at the beginning, and I didn't realize that Icarus had a younger cousin who Icarus's dad hurled down the side of a mountain as a, like, how dare you still be alive when my son is dead, and then he turned into a bird.
Yes, I wasn't familiar with that. What's his name?
Part two.
Daedalus.
Part two of that myth. But that was cool.
Well, oddly enough, I am slowly making. Actually, I stopped because I thought we might do it together at some point for our other Hubris on Toast. I have started reading Ovid's Metamorphosis.
Okay.
But I don't think I've got to Daedalus yet.
Okay.
So, but it's very good. What I've read thus far. I recommend Metamorphosis.
I will also say that at the very beginning of the book, there is a little cluster of stories that are just about like people getting into trouble with their balloons, which is kind of interesting in that, as I said, it really brought home to me that it's still not a particularly safe way of traveling. There's that amazing story about the priest who decided to take off in a chair.
This is a character right out of Father Ted, right? The balloon priest out of Brazil.
Yes, yeah. And took off and then disappeared overseas. But his parishioners continued to believe in his miraculous survival and pray daily for him. But about 3 months later, they found his lower torso and legs still attached to possibly the balloons.
Yeah, but this was like a cluster balloon, right?
Yes, yeah.
A chair with a bunch of helium balloons.
Yeah, that's him going out to sea there.
The balloon priest. Like that. What was that film, Danny Deck Chair, a few years ago, where someone?
I don't think I've seen that.
I haven't seen it, but
okay.
What interests me about this story as well was it was a charity run, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't a charity for like, stupid kids or people with diseases or something like that.
Something useless like that.
Yeah, it was to make a spiritual rest area for truck drivers.
That's hey, you know what? They need one too.
Yeah, why not?
They can stop. They can have holy, not holy water, but holy energy drinks. I guess they could get them blessed there, and trucker speed.
Well, obviously the balloon priest thought it was important enough to die.
To stake his life on it, yeah.
So, so I hope those truckers are pleased if they got their spiritual rest area, that they think of the balloon priest when they stop there. So apparently this first guy in France was someone called Dr. Alexander Charles. I think he's credited with the first hydrogen balloon flight.
Okay.
In France, and then in 1784 in the UK, it's a guy called Vincenzo Lunardi, who's the guy who went with his cat.
Yes, and who is played magnificently in a film version we're going to talk about in another show by the great Sir Laurence Olivier, doing an outrageous Italian accent.
Hey, I go up now in the balloon with my pussy cat. Actually, I don't think they have the cat in the film.
I don't think so. No, he's mostly just hitting on girls. In the
movie. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, come on, you lovely ladies, get on the balloon.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Another what's his name? Jared Leto had studied that performance for his House of Gucci.
Oh yes,
yeah.
And again, it's interesting that the book is kind of front loaded with, before they get really into the history of where it all begins. It's kind of front loaded with a series of little vignettes, balloon vignettes from across kind of recent times and the further past. And so that's the first place where he brings up, or maybe the only place where he brings up the story that the movie Night Crossing is about. Right. The escape of two families in a balloon from East Germany in 1978. And again, to think in 1978 that was the best option, for them to get out of East Germany and over the wall.
Yes. Again, keep an eye out for our companion YouTube video on some balloon films, and we'll talk about Night Crossing a bit in that. But no, that is a fascinating story.
Yeah. I had never. It's funny. I didn't know about it. And certainly didn't know that it was made the news enough that Disney would make a movie out of it.
It's odd. I get the feeling that's one of those. Sometimes you get these strange anomalies where something's like massively famous when it's new, and then just not remembered at all.
Yeah. Probably because they tore the wall down. It was like a decade later, but still, once the wall came down, I think a lot of those stories of Checkpoint Charlie and people trying to get over.
You would have thought. I think the film was a pretty big deal when it was new, and it was a big Disney release, right? And then,
interestingly, my wife remembered it. We watched it. Actually, no, we didn't. We just talked about it. She watched the other one with me, the Aeronauts, which is the last of the three we're going to talk about in that other episode. But yeah, she said, "Oh yeah, I saw that when I was a kid," and she just assumed it was about Nazi Germany, which I think because you probably saw it around the same time as she saw Sound of Music, and
Right.
and then
And
yeah,
it's people doing German accents, right, as well. So
yeah. Only the scary Germans. All the other Germans have English and American accents.
Yes.
But the scary Germans all have German accents.
Yeah. Because those other ones, they were fine.
Yeah.
There's only the ones who went commie.
Yeah. They all suddenly developed really kind of SS type of German accents. Very strange.
Anyway, we'll get to that. So then I suppose the first big one chronologically then out of the UK is Charles Green.
Okay.
His years are 1785 to 1870, and this was the guy who he was the one who pioneered using coal gas.
Okay, yes.
From the mains, right? So this would have been when, gaslight era, gaslight as in actual gaslight, not not significant other that they're crazy or whatever. Darren style.
Yeah.
And yeah, so he's the guy who. So this was significantly cheaper, right? Apparently, to use gold cast from the mains, and he also invented the trail rope, which is kind of like this. I don't quite understand it because I'm stupid, but I kind of vaguely get the concept. It's like a self-regulating ballast device, right? So you trail on the ground, so then the higher you go and the longer it is, and then as you get nearer to the ground, it picks up the slack in the. I don't
quite get the mechanics either, but it obviously worked. So this was fascinating to me too, because I had only ever understood balloons in their modern form of having some sort of little fire at the bottom that you controlled, and so the idea of just filling the balloon with gas and putting a big stopper in the bottom of it I didn't realize that's how it was done.
Me too. It's interesting as well. Thinking about it now, my memories as well of seeing those balloons, because I did see them up close when I was, even if I didn't go in, I certainly went to see them. And it's actually surprising when you see them, because those flames are huge and they're really close to very, very thin material. And I could never understand why they never caught fire. And obviously they do sometimes, but and I always think, oh, hang on now, that's not that. You shouldn't be doing that. That's not a good idea. But that is it's still the norm, right?
Yes, but before that kind of whole idea of a big Bunsen burner, basically, you just filled a thing with gas, put a stopper in it, and then it was all done. It was all done with ballast, right?
Yeah, and slowly releasing it, you could descend and So the other reason Charles Green is kind of important to our story as well, at least on the British end of the story, is that many of the kind of classic Victorian era, written kind of essays or reports on ballooning would have been done with the aid of Charles Green. A lot of writers went up with him, right? Including Henry Mayhew, who wrote an essay, A Balloon Flight Over London, and kind of helped him put together his a book that I've not read, but apparently is a classic, right? London Labour and the London Poor. And
I mean,
I think him get an overview of kind of the labyrinth city of London from the air, what it actually kind of, it just gave him a god's eye view of how sprawling it actually was, right, for the first time.
Yeah, I think it's hard for us to really understand living in a world of satellite imagery and stuff, and we kind of grew up in a world post being able to see everything from that god's eye panopticon view, right? But this for these people, it was the first time they had a chance to get above a city, and then really, you could really see there. Oh, these are the depressed areas. That's where the rich people live. That's and it's different seeing it on a map, right? It's a living city.
And also you have a kind of an idea of obviously they've been laying out cities for thousands of years, and and you could, but it's one thing to kind of assume that it looks like that, and then to actually see it, right, is quite a different thing. As a little aside, I mean, something I'll do this every minute. Some things that are thrown out, because that's what I like about books like this as well, is sending you down little rabbit holes. And I just finished this book yesterday, so I haven't actually had a chance to go down any of these yet. But I had never heard of the Great Fire of Newcastle and Gateshead in 1854. That's a new one on me.
Me neither.
That's something, I'm sure there's a book in that somewhere to read. It seems to have been a major event for that part of the country. Apparently, a French aeronaut called Eugene Goddard tours the US in 1854, and I guess he kind of kickstarts whatever ballooning would have. There's not much US ballooning in the book,
except for all the Civil War. There's a fairly lengthy section on the use of balloons in the Civil War.
We'll get to that because that's a very specific. Well, we'll get to it now then. Yeah. So this would have been specifically, from what I understand, 1861 to 1863, the Peninsula Campaign, which was kind of basically a series of sieges around Richmond, Virginia. Right. Yeah. No, this is a fascinating bit of Civil War history that I didn't know anything about.
Yeah, the balloon, basically the balloon race, like the balloon arms race of like that the North gets balloons first and uses them to kind of I mean, really, again, like we live in a world now where this is all done with satellites, right? But at that time, you couldn't get above a battlefield and just kind of observe. And apparently, what was interesting was they talk about in the book. He talks about this thing where it creates this illusion that if you can see the balloon, you assume you can be seen by the balloon.
Right.
And it was greatly demoralizing, panic-inducing to the soldiers who felt like they were going to get shot at or something dropped on them at any moment. Well,
that chapter is called "Spies in the Sky" as well, right? Which is kind of, and the other thing that's really fascinating about that is this idea of it works the other way as well. Right? You assume you can be spotted, and there's these great descriptions of like going up and just kind of hovering over, the enemy's camp and just waiting to be shot at any minute. But apparently, it didn't happen as often as you might think, because either they would.
I also think they were just out of range. I don't think the guns and cannons were actually able to, and you're kind of firing against gravity in that situation.
Yeah. So that's fascinating, just to think that you would just be hovering over and making noise, and the enemy are down there like, oh,
they said it was the first time ever that, for example, they were able to take so they could take aerial reconnaissance. They could see where the enemy were, and then they could shell them. But the people shelling them had never seen they were just told, aim here at this angle, and you're going to be able to hit them. And again, that's something that depressingly we take for granted now in war, but would have been brand new.
Yeah, no, that whole segment is fascinating, and also I have to admit, again, another thing I like about books like these that send you off, it's also a bit of a toehold, because I mean, I'm basically interested in anything historical, right? Any kind of especially big kind of events that changed the tide of history and all that. But it's like a potential fascination, and some things I can't quite, like, it's a bit too, I need a specific thing to get.
Yeah, you need a toehold. It's too monolithic.
Yeah, and American Civil War stuff has always been like, I've never quite got the taste for it or the flavor or something. But this chapter on this particular element of it has now finally kind of got me a little bit interested in actually reading more about the American Civil War.
One of the things that fascinated me in that section was that it was a kind of almost an aside. They were like, oh yeah, and there was a bunch of German mercenaries fighting during the American Civil War on whichever side they were fighting. I can't remember if they were fighting for the South or the North, but that one of those mercenaries was Zeppelin.
Yes.
Who was like,
hang on a minute.
Yeah. And basically came up with the idea of like, as if those things could be directed in some way and made to fly with a propeller.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm
quite,
assuming I am imagining him with a monocle
oh yes, yeah,
and riding
giant
bitches,
mustache.
and yes.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, just
It's
who
just a ticket, as they say.
Yeah, just I don't know. I'm fascinated to think of that. Yeah, who knew that Zeppelin was in the U.S. fighting in the Civil War?
Yeah,
Bizarre.
yeah. Well, we know because we read this
Yeah,
book.
well, because we read this
And
book.
if you want to know that too, you should also read this. Good.
Yes.
Honestly, it's a very good. Yeah, I mean, I have a dozen or so books on my reading list now, as if I needed another fucking. But so yes, onwards to another fascinating figure, Felix Nada.
Yes.
Back in France. Now, there's a lot to say about Felix Nada because.
Well, I love his N to begin with. He had the most swooshy, beautiful N at the beginning of his name.
Right.
I'm going to steal that. That's going to be mine.
So,
but yeah, he was graphic designer, photographer.
Yes, caricaturist.
Caricaturist, balloonist.
Yeah, I mean, also he just took very iconic early portraits, photographic portraits, right, of including Baudelaire, Sarah Bernhardt, Debussy, Gustave Doré, Alexander Dumas, Émile Zola, guy who, and just that would be like something someone to be remembered for, right? But he was also up in a fucking balloon trying to take photographs with on glass plates, and that whole thing is fascinating as well, like because you don't tend to think of, you just think, oh yeah, go up with the balloon, take a picture, there you go. But the complications and the chemistry and the science with that is mind-boggling.
It was a colossal pain in the ass in those days.
And then he went down, he'd had enough of being up in the air, and then he went down in the sewers and the catacombs, right?
Yes.
With electrical lighting of his own design. And
right.
That's something I've looked it up. Run a Google search for Felix Nada's catacombs photos.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
Okay.
So he did all that. And he comes into our story again a little bit later on during another siege.
The siege of Paris. Yeah.
But just before then, because I'm kind of trying to vaguely go slightly chronological here, hang on now.
Have we skipped over?
Felix Nada was he the guy? Yes, he wrote about the what was it called? Yes, here we go. The Le Giant, right? This was the Louis and Jules Godard balloon, which was, well, I'll read a description of it, right? Yeah. So this would have been, I guess, this would have been an attempt at like a grand passenger balloon.
Yeah, the right? Titanic of the balloon world.
The cabin had a central entrance door and several little windows or portholes. It could be divided by partitions into a maximum of 6 separate compartments, and the extensive fixtures was altered according to the requirements of different voyages. Besides the captain's compartment with navigation desk, it contained at various times a set of guest bunk beds, a small printing press, a photograph.
Sure, take that in a balloon. Why not? In case you need to drop flyers, right?
To get the word all the way around that balloon, right? A photographic studio, a galley kitchen and wine store. Very French. And most important, last touch of luxury, a portable lavatory.
Yes. It's funny because there's I don't know if there's another large balloon that's mentioned earlier called the Royal Vauxhall, which I think was an English one. And much of the weight of these provisions, 200 pounds, would eventually, of course, become expendable organic ballast. Basically, because these are just filled with food. Like the amount of drunken ballooning in this book is astonishing.
Yes, yes.
It seems like basically everyone was pissed out of their tree.
Prerequisite was some champagne, right? Like,
yes, yeah,
you couldn't possibly take to the air without.
Yeah, being half in the tank. But yeah, but this one basically, yeah. So the exact arrangements for disposing of this were not advertised. So you do wonder then, yeah, how did people shit in these balloons?
Because they would have needed to go because they were full of hampers full of wine and meat, and
yeah,
yes, which
yeah,
is another reminder as well that this is very much a history of posh people in the air as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a few great stories that I made note of that, you know, about you know, people being quite angry about balloons, and you know, like it was seen as a kind of a rich man's, you know.
Oh yeah, I can imagine you'd be toiling
game.
the field and some fucking champagne bottle lands on your head or kills your cow or something. So Nada also writes an account of, I think it's the Le Giant's second flight, which was totally disastrous, right, and ended up crashing somewhere in Germany, I think, which is another fascinating thing, because you don't necessarily think of it, and you know, unless you're European, continental European, you don't really think of crossing borders as well in a balloon, right? Like you don't have to stay within the perimeter of your country.
No, and in fact, well, as we know, then it was the way that, you know, East Germans managed to escape out of East Germany to West Germany. But in fact, that's another thing that kind of the history of ballooning really does anticipate much of the later history of exploration of space in a way, right? And that famous photograph taken of the Earthrise, you know, taken from the moon, which kind of kickstarted the whole environmental movement, because suddenly people could see that the planet was just kind of hanging there, this little jewel in utter darkness, and there are no borders on it. There are, you know, it is what it is. But yeah, this is in a way the first time humans again have that ability to look and go, hang on, there's no big red line between, you know, France and Germany and the rest of you get balloon. And so there was this idea of the balloons. Like I do love that about this, and about any new technology, the immediate assumption that, like, this is the one that's going to liberate mankind. Yes, balloons are an answer for everything.
Right.
You know, I love this thing about like manual labor will be a thing of the past, because we will use balloons for all.
To pull like carts along the field.
There's a part where like nobody will need a wheelbarrow anymore. A balloon will take that up the hill for you.
It's the Silicon Valley hubris of its day, right? Like where they think they've solved everything.
Yes, lower back pain, a balloon, my friend.
Yes. It'll just make you stand straight the whole time. Every man will have a balloon
attached to it. Yeah. But it's kind of sweet. It's sweet that there's this kind of, you know, but you know, and you can see in certain areas like this idea of like, oh, you know, why are we at war with these people who are, you know, seven fields over?
It's charming now in the rear view, but it's interesting at the time, and there are a few examples in this book of like, you know, cartoonists who wrote like a satirical, you know, drew these satirical cartoons of the sky just full of drunken fools in balloons. So you can imagine at the time it would have been second balloons, you know. Like,
right.
But it's charming to us. Now, who knows? In 200 years, people will refer to, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk as a charming, but it ain't happening now.
Right.
You need
you know, wait, again, the self-driving cars, that whole thing. We're in this weird liminal space between that being a real thing and that still being kind of
although according to people in Silicon Valley, that'll happen next week, like, you know. Don't know about that. Sorry, you touched on a sensitive point there.
No, sorry about that. That's fine.
That's right.
I do feel like we should bring up Napoleon's balloon brief dalliance or fetish for balloons, right? And that whole part is quite near the beginning, but like Sophie, right? Sophie, what's her name? She was like the official aeronaut of, you know, Napoleon's of the French Empire, right? She was the one whose husband jumped out of the balloon
Yes.
in order to Sophie Blanchard, maybe?
Sophie Blanchard, yes.
Yeah.
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 No, that's not. You're thinking that's a different. That's Lieutenant Harris and Miss Stocks. Sophie Blanchard was the one who did go up with her husband, but they both died in the crash. The reason I'm really confused is because the Aeronauts film, which we'll get to later, kind of
yes, I know they matched
together.
They matched them up.
Sophie Blanchard was the one who basically died with her husband, and it's not the one where the husband jumped out to sacrifice himself. That was Lieutenant Harris and Miss Stocks.
Okay, but then Sophie died by herself though, because she's the one who creates that little beautiful like silver gondola thing that she just flies around on the balloon like Venus on that clamshell kind of a thing. Like that's just awesome. And she seemed to be completely fearless until finally she literally, her balloon fell out of the sky, caught fire, and then she hit a building and fell to her death.
I think her husband might have died earlier, maybe in a separate incident.
I think he did. Yeah. But you're right. But it's not the same. Yes. But yeah, the movie mashes them up into one kind of.
Yes, and we'll get to that on our other exciting YouTube video. Look for Yakisini Soba on balloons.
And then she was in some sort of feud with another French woman balloonist, which is fascinating to me as well. Like that there were competing women to be
some of which were like aerial acrobats as well. Like they'd go up and they'd be like a trapeze would be suspended in the balloon, and
just hats off to those ladies. But I love that story about where they inflate this gigantic balloon for like Napoleon's coronation, and they release it, and it floats away out of France and floats all the way to Italy, where it ends up landing on the Emperor Nero's tomb. And then it's a big public relations debacle for for Napoleon. He's not best pleased that his balloon has ended up landing on tyrant and murderous pervert Emperor Nero. Not a connection he was hoping to make. And then he got kind of got the hump with his balloon guy, who was Garnerin, I think. But then I think Sophie managed to convince him back. Well, she's a cute girl flying around in a balloon gondola, so he got back on board with the whole idea of balloons.
Yeah, well, that's that element of it as well. That it was a mixture of, the amazing science of ballooning, but also doesn't hurt if you've got a woman flashing her legs. Brought that element, which is something again we'll talk about when we talk about, even though they toned it down quite a bit in the Aeronauts, but it's where science meets the can, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. Here's another weird little aside. Are you aware of Mary Shelley's book, The Last Man?
No, it's one I've always meant to get round to read at some point, but
has a balloon in it. Comes up, but I wasn't even aware that it existed. I didn't know she'd written a kind of a semi follow-up to Frankenstein.
Yes, a friend of mine is actually a bit of a Mary Shelley expert.
Okay.
I know a little bit about, just because she mentions things.
Okay.
So, James Glacier, then, seeing as we're talking we'll talk about more when we talk about the Aeronauts. Again, back to the UK. Who's again, speaking of reading list books, his travels in the air seems like something we'll be getting to at some point. So yes, along with Henry Tracy Coxwell, in 1862, broke the altitude world record. Right, they went up. I mean, they're not sure because they passed out. Right.
Yes.
But somewhere around the 10,000 meter mark, right?
They were basically getting into that stratosphere kind of, that chunk of air between us and space.
Well,
they were getting up there.
Thanks to him as well, and later on a guy called in France Leon Tesserent de Bort, something that doesn't sound anything like that at all, I'm sure. He was literally the guy to coin the phrase stratosphere, right? Which was the first time they were kind of aware that it's just fucking air, and that there's a kind of strata.
Yes, yeah.
And I think
you start to run out of it when you get high enough.
Glacier kind of pointed in that direction, and then other people followed it up. So also around this time, Dr. George Merryweather's Tempest Prognosticator was another aside that fascinated. Do you remember this?
Oh, yeah.
I shall read a little bit. Actually.
Yeah, please do. Yes.
This is fascinating.
I read that out loud to my wife because I was also captivated by this.
Yes. So here we go. There was so the Dr. George Merryweather noticed that it's talking about leeches. Based on the well-known response of leeches to sudden changes in barometric pressure. Their soft, gelatinous bodies were squeezed and made drowsy and inactive by normal air pressure. But low pressure refreshed and awoke them. So some poet called William Cowper, who was also a balloon file, apparently, says, I have a leech in a bottle that foretells all these prodigies and convulsions of nature. No change in the weather surprises him. He is worth all the barometers in the world. I like how he's very kind of pally with his leech.
Leech, yes. Well, you know what? As you well know, Clive, as somebody who is sensitive to changes in the bar, this really struck me. I was like, oh, am I some sort of reverse leech? Because what I find that when it goes up, I become tired and lethargic and unable to function.
And refuse to detach yourself until someone sets a light at you.
Yes. Right. Prize me off with a stick.
So go further, Dr. Merryweather's, because this is actually this. I was trying to kind of figure this, trying to picture it, and it is kind of it really set my imagination. Like, Dr. Merryweather's prognosticator was in fact an ingenious form of multiple leech barometer. It consisted of a circular display of 12 glass flasks, each containing a prize leech, not a normal leech, a prize-winning leech, a prize leech partially immersed in rainwater. The flasks were cunningly enclosed at the top with a system of whalebone springs. And these, in turn, were linked to a set of counterweights connected to metal hammers arranged to strike against an impressive brass bell mounted in the center of the apparatus. So basically, barometric pressure would have set these leeches to moving around, which in turn would have played a little tune on the bell, and it's kind of a picture of it. There's a beautiful thing. He kind of describes it as fantastic. Merryweather decorated the instrument with flutings, chains, and curlicues, making it look like a cross between an Indian temple and a gypsy merry-go-round. This thing looks beautiful.
I would love to have a leech prognostication weather machine. But yeah, I mean, really, this whole section just again gets and Glacier himself was kind of a very, very early meteorologist, right? He believed not just that you could understand the weather, through observation and so on, but that it would be predictable, right? If you could understand enough about it, that you'd be able to predict it, he seems to have been fairly much correct.
Definitely, he was one of the first people to kind of understand the science of aerology, I guess.
Yes, yeah.
So, 1870 to 1871, the siege of Paris during the Franco-Prussian War. Again, to my great shame, something I knew nothing of.
Yep. Me too, and I was blown away.
It's a fascinating tale of how Marianne survived the siege of Paris with a mixture of balloons and pigeons.
Yes.
I mean, I have little to say about this other than it's just a fascinating story, and I would quite like to know kind of more about it. And it's one of the longer sections of the book.
Yeah, but it's just the whole idea that, you know, again, in pre-ballooning, you lay siege to a city and you completely cut off. And the idea was to completely cut Paris off from the rest of the world, so that no news could get in and out. So, and yeah, quite quickly they were like, "Hang on,
quite quickly, because
we can get up and out."
They started eating everything as well. So this is another fascinating idea. They ran out of food. So, if you will indulge me,
please.
Here, Nick. Most of the cafes remained open, and wine alone remained surprisingly cheap and plentiful. Many of the poor, especially the soldiers, were drunk for much of the time. As food supplies became seriously short, most domestic animals in the city were eventually eaten, except for a few prudent cats. There was a cull of ducks, carp, and goldfish from the municipal ponds, over 40,000 horses, and most of the rare animals from the zoo. Plants, including 2 elephants and 2 zebras, were butchered. A surviving restaurant siege menu proposes elephant soup, kangaroo stew, roast camel, antelope terrine, and baked cat with rat garnish.
Yes. And was it not so? The guy who first kind of started to, like, you know, try to take the balloons out of the city was the guy who Durarov, I think, or Durarov, his name is. He was the one who was regarded by many as an irresponsible, bad weather balloonist, a hooligan of the clouds who took too many risks, and accordingly had a faithful, popular following. But then, when it turns out, when push came to shove, and they needed somebody who was a bit of a fucking head case to go up in a balloon and try to take it over, you know, enemy battlements, he was right in there because he was a. I'm
imagining Ray Winston in a beret.
Yes, exactly.
Eating rat pate.
Durarov challenged all the fury of the Prussian guns in an old, small, clapped-out balloon. He simply flung himself into the clouds and went at them neck or nothing. He shot his balloon straight upwards like a shell from a mortar. Dude.
Also, I love this kind of medieval woodcut style illustration.
Yeah, that's gorgeous,
isn't it? This you can't really see it, but so this is, I guess, these are the heavens. And I like the fact that the sun and the moon are not in the heavens; they're in this.
No,
that's kind of cute. But you know, that's a beautiful. That's another imagination triggering image by Camille Flammarion, who's another interesting balloonist, astronomer, scientist, and science fiction writer.
Yes. Well, again, obviously, you know, as we know, balloons really fired the imagination of your Edgar Allan Poes and your Jules Verne's and the rest of it, right? They, you know.
Yeah, well, even earlier than that, Cyrano de Bergerac as well, right? Writes some sort of very early balloon adventure, which even predates the Poe one. Actually, the Poe, worth mentioning as well. There's a really nice. I wanted to show it. I couldn't find it, but I have a copy here somewhere. There's a really nice Penguin Classics collection, the science fiction stories of Edgar Allan Poe.
Okay.
Which I've
mostly read his horror. I don't think I've read much of his SF.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, and it's got it's Penguin Classics, right? So it's got like a fascinating introduction and footnotes and things to to chase more rabbit holes and more books put on your ever increasing book list that you'll never get to read in this lifetime or 10.
Right.
But it's all the fun of the fair, right? The hubris of thinking that you're actually going to get around to all this at some point.
Yes. There is This is just what we were talking before, and I do love any of these kind of. There's a few of these little moments in the book, but this is again about you know, a bunch of wealthy. This is 1858. The British balloon, the Australian, made some startling flights over Melbourne and Sydney. There was a late summer night ascent in March from some gardens in Melbourne, in which a basket full of local dignitaries sailed over the botanical gardens in bright moonlight, with a magical sight of the festival fireworks far below. But attempting to land at Batan Swamp, they found themselves in a working-class district, and the balloon basket was seized by a violent crowd. Amid vocal democratic objections to such superior transport, the distinguished guests were forced to escape by jettisoning champagne bottles, picnic hampers, several bags of sand ballast, and finally throwing off a few hardy objectors still clinging to the sides of the basket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get them! Get those filthy curs!
Yeah. So yeah, it wasn't for everybody, the ballooning lark. It was definitely for those who could afford it.
Well, it's interesting as well because I suppose because it's later usurped by planes, and it's interesting that it's never happened really, right? The democratization of balloons has never happened because it is a wealthy man's sport.
Yes, still is.
Yeah, like I mentioned those balloon races that took place in my area when I was growing up. We had a local celebrity entrepreneur, Eric Penlan, who was had a farm and he had local businesses and stuff. And he was our village's
Richard Branson
balloon hero, basically. Yeah.
Right.
He was on a famous. We had a local TV program documentary where they showed him in his balloon, and the host ends up in a tree, and it was quite hilarious. Yeah. So.
Oh, sorry. Actually, I have marked another one of these because it touches on something else that we have talked about before. And it's kind of perfect, but it's right after when you mentioned about this idea of kind of like looking at the city and seeing that it's kind of, well, for one thing, just the lights of the city, even to be able to see them from above and to kind of to get a sense of the gin houses and the kind of stuff. But anyway, on landing near Hackney Marshes, the balloon is surrounded by a threatening mob, which has pursued it all the way from Stepney, Limehouse, and Poplar. Prophetically, it was as if the balloon had trespassed into an African jungle and stirred up an unfriendly horde of howling natives. Assaulted by their yells, their savage imprecations, curses both loud and deep, their threats to destroy the balloon, Poole Green and his burly crew just managed to pack their equipment into a cart and beat a strategic retreat to the local Eagle and Child public house. Hackney.
Cockney Zulus.
Yes, yeah. And am I not wrong? Is Hackney not what we talked about? Is that not where that horrible housing complex that we watched?
Oh, Grenfell.
Yeah.
It's somewhere around there, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, yes.
Yeah. Also, where Robin grew up.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yeah, Hackney. That's why. And then this may explain why, because there's also after.
Oh, sorry. I misunderstood you. I thought you were talking about not Grenfell Tower. You were talking about somewhere in the estate.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, that's Hackney, right?
That is Hackney.
So Hackney has always apparently been a terrifying place, even back in the days of ballooning adventurers who accidentally landed in Hackney and were like, "Holy shit!"
A great addition to that documentary if a balloon suddenly.
With a bunch of rich people with champagne and hampers. Yeah. Just perfect symbol of everything.
Pikey.
Oh, they're a perfect Monty Python moment. But yeah,
that one's full of roaches.
But I mean, the reason why, I suppose, is you have these things like, as the Bengal light went out, they completed this supernatural effect by emptying half a bag of ballast sand directly onto the upturned faces 100 feet below. So basically, this is what they had floated over some farmers and then frightened them and then dumped a bunch of sand in their faces and floated off.
So this could alternatively be called "Posh Fuckers in the Sky." Is an alternative title for this book. So so then, interestingly, the book's concluding chapter is
Oh yeah,
quite the
super
downer.
grim.
Yeah,
Super grim. I forgot about this. Yes, that the attempt to conquer the North Pole by balloon seems incredibly badly thought out and
yes,
planned. And
yes.
I mean, one thing that was interesting is I didn't know, this whole idea of boxing, right? So that this thing that you could float up to a certain level in the balloon and be taken by a wind, but if you get to a higher level, there may be a wind that it takes you right back to where you started.
Crosswind, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is Salomon Andre, a Swede, right? Who, yeah, in 1896 to 1897, a polar expedition to get from the North Pole. I suppose they took off from it's called Danes Islands. Another thing I didn't actually again, another rabbit hole, was this whole idea of this Norwegian archipelago, Svalbard, I think this area of the world is, which is kind of as near as you can kind of get or take a balloon from, right? And yeah, they attempted to reach the North Pole. Didn't end well. Let's just put it that way.
No. Although so they had a photographer with them, and I guess they found his camera and his film quite a long time. Later. Yeah, quite a long time after
we found the bodies and the skeletons. What's fascinating about this as well, apparently this was a major influence on Lovecraft writing at the Mountains of Madness, as well as ripping off that Edgar Allan Poe book.
That makes perfect sense. But that I find this photograph or these photographs to be just chilling. These pictures of the balloon having basically run out of power and ending up on the ice, and they just kind of snapped these last few pictures before trying to grab what they could and tried to hoof it all the way back south. And obviously that's just the stories of them crossing the ice and then the ice kind of cracking and pinging and shifting.
We know because they kept a journal, right? And again, another thing that Richard Holmes writes, perhaps the most strangely eloquent of all is an observation of the gulls which continually flew over their heads. Once these big birds had seemed symbols of freedom and escape, white, airborne, and graceful spirits. But now they swooped low and seemed vicious, noisy, and hostile like vultures. They fight, scream, and struggle, seem jealous of us, no longer give the impression of an innocent white doves, but of outright birds of prey, carrion. So it's interesting that, this expedition starts on one note and then ends just in nightmarish tragedy, right?
Yeah.
To the point that even the birds have turned against them, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, it's a stone cold bummer. But then there's even a story, quite early in the book from the 2000s about like a balloon full of folks in Australia that hits power lines, and 10 people die. Two of the younger kids jump out of the balloon, and then everyone else, and they die just from the fall, and then everyone else is burned to death. And it's still not a safe thing to do.
So I do apologize to your missus who's tried to get you in a balloon, because I forced you to read a book that's just reinforced your belief that you shouldn't be doing that.
Yes.
Sorry, Jennifer. I do apologize.
But
next time I'll assign balloons are fucking great.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, did you not, like me, feel like I can't remember his name now, but the guy who wrote 3 Men in a Boat could have really done a nice 3 Men in a Balloon.
Bumble in a Balloon.
Yeah.
Men in a Balloon. Yeah. Where they all die tragically.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting actually, because one of the things we talked about the 3 Men in a Bumble is the whole pre-Great War suspicion of German culture, and that's so there's a reading list at the back, which I made notes of. So, and one of the ones is a book that I've never read, but I'd like to, because it belongs, because we talked at the time there was that small cluster of similarly suspicious books. For instance, Riddle of the Sands, which is one I have read, which is fascinating. And another one is H.G. Wells's The War in the Air, right, where someone ends up floating over Germany and then, hang on, kind of notices that they might be amassing troops. And, it's kind of fascinating to think that there was that level of suspicion, and how in retrospect it seems to have been inevitable that even though it was triggered by a very specific, the attempted assassination of Franz Ferdinand, that it was that if it wasn't that, it would have been something else, maybe like it was just waiting to happen, right? Any excuse to kind of
kick off. Yeah.
So some other books that are on my list. Thomas Baldwin's Aeropedia. Another one you mentioned, that Mary Shelley book. There's Jane Lewdon's The Mummy! Exclamation point. That sounds a fascinating science fiction tale. Jules Verne. I've never read 5 Weeks in a Balloon.
Nope.
Or I don't think I've ever read Around the World in 80 Days either.
Nope.
But I think we'll be going more. So actually, that's probably something we should mention as well. Is it doesn't get into dirigibles much.
No.
So there's nothing about Zeppelins or the Hindenburg or stuff like that. So we don't go into that. But we will be going, I think, because we'll be taking a look at a couple of other Jules Verne books, not in the not too distant future.
Yes. Yeah.
But other than that, you got the Felix Nada thing. James Glacier, like we said, Travels in the Air. Thomas Wise's Through the Air. There's a whole bunch of fascinating sounding balloon literature. Again, even though I chose this, I didn't necessarily think it would lead to me
open up this
a balloon book.
It was going to open up this huge can of leeches for you.
Yes,
you were going to have to do. It's
you mean weather prognosticating organisms.
I have made a little bit of fun of ballooning as a rich man's sport, but the actual fact is that people like Glacier and a lot of these other people did pioneering work in obviously aeronautics and also in science. And really they're to be commended for being fucking nuts. For absolutely putting their lives on the line in order to figure things out about how our world works. And I know it's often easy to forget that early science was so fraught with potential danger to the scientists who were engaged in those, whether it was Charles Darwin sticking, acid spitting beetles in his mouth, or Marie Curie dying of radiation poisoning. These people did advance our understanding of the world, and these guys were absolutely mad bastards. Nothing but respect for those, maybe the folks with their hampers and their champers and their dropping dirt in the peasants' eyes. Maybe they didn't advance science too much, but but really it's fascinating. So many of our technologies, so much of what we know about the world really is dependent on these first steps towards getting off of sea level, getting up there. It
really is a very interesting book, and I'm glad it lived up to and kind of slightly exceeded our expectations.
As I said,
thumbs up, I think, from both of us, right? Which
thanks to you, Clive, because as I said, I would have, and so now that I've finished it, I'll probably take these notes back out. I plan to pass it to my wife and to my mum. I think my mum would fully enjoy this as well. So
right.
So great book.
Yes. Right.
Good job, Richard Holmes. Thanks.
Let's drop this bottle of champers on the lap below.
Okay.
What a whiz.